And we learned that there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's cattle and the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. What was the strife about?
There were too many of them all in one place.
Okay, and there's not enough what? Not enough land, and so not enough supply for all of the cattle. And so there began to be a strife. And we learned that, by the way, Abraham steps up, doesn't he? And he says, I'm sorry?
He offered the good pasture.
Yeah, in other words, you take your choice, right? Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between thee and me, between thy herdsman and thy herdsman. He said, for we be brethren. What lesson can we draw from that, or what is a good lesson or two that we can draw from that?
That's how we should be treating all of our brothers,
Right.
regardless of whether they're here in this congregation or another.
And there can be room for, lack of a better term, compromise in matters of judgment, right? In other words, we don't have to divide over matters that are not matters of faith. We should not. And also, we should not be self-willed in that I'm going to get my way. Abraham displays a great attitude. Because what could Abraham have said?
I'm older. I'm the one that was called.
Right.
I'm going to choose. You need to find somewhere else to go.
And he might have had, I'm more entitled to this than you are. But I think in reality, Abraham being the older, probably then the more mature. And so he says, you choose, you look, whatever you choose, and I'll take that. You go to the right hand, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. And so there doesn't have to be any strife. Interestingly, even among the Lord's apostles, at times there got to be a strife. You remember the James and John. That's it. We wanted the better position, if you will, when the kingdom comes. Of course, they didn't understand all of that. But we learned some great lessons here as we treat one another. We got to remember the church is really greater than any of us, right? All of us put together as far as that goes. And so rather than dividing the church and hurting the cause of Christ due to wanting my way, Abraham was willing to suffer. And so should we be willing to suffer. Now, we can't compromise anything that's a matter of faith that God has said, but you remember Ephesians 4, let all things, in verses 1 and 2, he says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you walk worthy of the calling wherewith you are called, in all lowliness and meekness, forbearing one another in love. There's an attitude of unity before we actually get to the one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one body, all of those things. So the attitude of unity, I think there's a great lesson for us there in the Old Testament. Well, Lot looks about and he looks down to the south. Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, likened to the land of Egypt, as thou comest unto Zoar. So this is a good land. And Lot says, this is what I will choose then. I don't know that he is being rude in any way, but he's certainly not thinking too much of, no, Lot, Lot probably should have said, Abraham, you choose, and I'll take the other. But we don't have a record of him doing that. I think we're going to see that Abraham was walking by faith and Lot's walking by sight. And that makes a big difference, doesn't it? Because we're going to see something a little bit later on. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. This is the way then that God had said it was to happen to begin anyway. God's promise to Abraham, he's separating Abraham from all of the other because he's going to fulfill that promise in him. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tent toward Sodom. He pitches his tent toward Sodom. Where do we find him later on? And we find him in Sodom. So be careful how you pitch your tent, right? And so sometimes a person will come along, and if you're flirting with something that's a little bit wrong, somebody might say to you, you know what, you're pitching your tent toward Sodom. Because you'll find him not only in Sodom, but you'll find him at the gate. Now, what took place at the gate in ancient cities? That, and it was kind of like a courthouse. And they would do transactions at the gate. And so that may indicate that Lot, once he got into Sodom, may have gained some favor among the people, and they set him up. Later on, they said, you know, this man came in among, will he be a judge among us? Maybe he was what we might call in a little bit of political situation here. I don't know. He did. He got himself established. And so, well, he sees some things that are not good. He says, but the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Those of you that have a Bible that has a light to it, can you switch over to 2 Peter 2, 7 through 9? I can find it on mine if you cannot. But 2 Peter 2, 7 through 9.
And delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversation of the wicked, so that a righteous man dwelling among them, and seeing and vexed his righteous soul from day to day with their unlawful deeds.
Okay, we see that Lot's soul was vexed or troubled because he looks out and he sees all this wickedness that's going on. He doesn't agree with it, but he's living there. And not only that, we're going to see something terrible happens a little bit later on. His wife, his children. He's going to lose a lot, isn't he? Well, Lot's going to lose a lot. No pun intended. But he's going to lose a great deal regarding his family. And even though his soul was vexed, it may be the influence of the wickedness has had an undue influence on some of his family, especially some of the daughters that and sons-in-law that would not leave when he tried to get them to leave. Also, someone look up, if with your electronic Bible there, Jude 7. Jude, maybe 6 and 7, I think it is, though.
Kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. He hath preserved an everlasting change under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah, and the cities about them in like manner, giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh, are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of.
Okay, so Sodom and Gomorrah, thousands of years later, are still set forth as a negative example to us today, not to do what they did. And in fact, there were those in Jude's day, they were ungodly men with ungodly deeds, he says. And he says they're like the angels which kept not their first estate. And you know, we need to be careful. We think that we're so strong spiritually at times, but someone has observed if the devil can talk angels out of heaven, you just think what he could do to you and me if we're not on guard. And then he says, even as Sodom and Gomorrah giving themselves over to fornication. Now we know from the account in the book of Genesis, in Genesis 18, perhaps, as we get to that a little bit later, among the types of fornication, you see fornication is a broad term. It's the word porneia, from which we get the word pornography, and things of that nature. Illicit sexual intercourse, illicit sexual actions. And we know from Genesis that the type of sexual perversion that was going on was what is today known as homosexuality, right? But the Bible calls that fornication. And so I think that's interesting for us to know. It's come to light like in Matthew 19:9, that whosoever shall put away his wife except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery, and whosoever marrieth her which is put away doth commit adultery. So we learn from this that, yes, homosexuality is a type of fornication then, and we see a lot of that happening in our society. But anyway, Sodom was wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. Notice again, this was before the Lord. God knew what was going on. And of course, God knows what's going on today. And the Lord said unto Abram, this is Genesis 13:14 now. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. Look all around. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. This would be reassuring to Abraham. He's gone through, there are other people who are in the land. There's not enough room for Lot and his herd, and Abraham's Lot's herd, rather. But he says, I'm going to give you this land, and I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth. This is a hyperbole. That is, just as one cannot number the grains, if you will, of the dust, if that's what dust has, or even the stars, so that if thou can tell the number of the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed be also. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. I take it that some time has passed by. It would take some time for Lot, to have picked out his land. I'm sure it would have taken a little bit of time to walk about and see all of this. Now then, Abram is told to walk through the land and the length of it and the breadth of it, for I will give it unto thee. So that's going to take some time. But I do believe also that he's telling Abraham, I want your faith to be active here. If you believe me, walk through this land. And you look at it. And so he's going to be motivated to act. Then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is Hebron. If you've studied your map, you probably can, with your mind's eye right now, look on the map and you see Hebron. Later, Hebron will be given to what significant man? He said, 85 years old. Caleb, give me this mountain. I am as strong this day as I was when God said that he would give it to him. So Caleb will inhabit Hebron. And of course, you can still travel in Hebron today. But the plain of Mamre, which is Hebron, and when he gets to there, he builds there an altar unto the Lord, unto Jehovah. So he's continuing then in worshiping God. Again, following Abraham from the smoke of his altars. Abraham was a worshiping person. We come to Genesis chapter 14. And this chapter could be defined as Abram defeats the kings and meets with Melchizedek. That's what's going to happen in Genesis chapter 14. In Genesis 14, you've got 4 kings on one side and 5 kings on another side. They're going to go into battle. And here we understand why. I'll start reading here in Genesis 14, verse 1. And it came to pass in the days of Amphrael, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elazar, Chedorlaomer, now there's what you can name your next child, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. Keeping in mind, when you're reading about kings here, these are not large nations. These are small areas, but they would still have their king. King of nations is probably a mixed multitude of people. That these made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and with Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Edom, or Admah, and Shemeber, king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All these were joined together in the vale of Siddim, which is what? The Salt Sea. What's another name for the Salt Sea? The Dead Sea. The Dead Sea. What can you tell me about the Salt Sea other than it has salt in it? Nothing lives there. And I've not been there, but those who have been there and have gone into the Salt Sea say basically you can just really like sit in the Salt Sea. It's so buoyant because of all the salt content that is there. What river runs into the Salt Sea from the north? The Jordan River. What river runs out of the Salt Sea? There's not one. So the Dead Sea receives, but it never gives. And therefore it's dead. That's a great illustration for us, isn't it? If we want to be alive, we not only then need to receive blessings, but we need to give blessings. We don't want to be like the Dead Sea. And I think the Dead Sea probably there's no life in the Dead Sea. Can't live there because of cannot live in it because of the salt content. But this is where they're joined in battle down around the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer. These 4 kings that are going against the 5 kings, evidently there had been a war between them before, and Chedorlaomer had dominated them, put them in subjection, and required of them, if you will, taxation. So 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they said, that's enough. We're going to rebel. They're not going to pay that. So in the 14th year came Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaims, and Ashtaroth, Karnaim, and the Zuzims, and Ham, and the Emims, and Shaveth Kirchathaim, and the Horites, and the mountain Seir, unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they returned and came to other locations we can read about. But there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and all of these kings with the ones that we just read. 4 kings with 5, with all of their men, and they're fighting one another. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. Maybe where it said head to the hills, I don't know. Who can tell me anything about these slime pits that were evidently in that area at that time? What's this slime pit? Kind of like oil. Commentators will tell us it is bitumen, or I think the English call it bitumen. Bitumen. What is that? What is bitumen? Bitumen. I'm sorry? I didn't understand that. Tar, okay. It is, I'm getting old, so you have to speak up. That's like a what? Do you know? I don't know. It is off of petroleum, like I think Jim said, oil. But it's kind of like asphalt. They put it in asphalt today. And they also put it on tops of these. As a matter of fact, our building may need it. When you see them get up there with those mops and put that black, what I call tar-looking stuff on there, that's what that is. You can buy this today. But it was readily available then in that part of the world, and it's still readily available for us today. It's kind of like, I just called it tar, as Terry mentioned. But I wouldn't want to fall in it. And so here they're trying to escape, and they fell there. That is, in this area. It wasn't conducive for trying to get away, evidently. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way. So these 4 kings, as they're defeating now the 5 kings, and the people have fled from Sodom and Gomorrah, they have the spoils of war. They go in and they take these things, and then they head back home. But there's another thing that they took. What did they take other than all those things? They took Lot. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Well, this was not a good choice, was it, for Lot? That is, to go into this area. They're so wicked. And now then also he's wound up as kind of a spoil of war because of being in the wrong location. But there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, and brother of Aner, and these were confederate with Abram. Abraham is a very important figure in this part of the world at this time. We're going to see that Abraham has a lot of people with him. But he's called Abram, the Hebrew. This is the first time the word Hebrew appears in the Bible. What does the word Hebrew mean? It means from beyond the river. In other words, the Euphrates. You'll remember from whence he came? From on the other side of the Euphrates River. And so, and there are those who say also that it's a derivative of Eber, and that's probably so. Some commentators doubt that that's why he's called that, but really it's because he came from the other side. But the significance of this is he is the Hebrew. His descendants are also going to be known as the Hebrews then. Joseph will be called a Hebrew. You remember the accusation that was brought against him falsely, that this Hebrew came in and made advances at Potiphar's wife, which he had not done. It was the other way around, and he refused her. Then also it will become then a nation of people, the Hebrews. It will also become a language that we still, some people do anyway, study today, the Hebrew language. And we even have a book of the Bible called Hebrews. But here's the first mention of the word Hebrew in the Bible. What do you, and well, we're going to see that, and I said these were confederate with Abram. And so when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, what does it mean that Lot is his brother? I thought it was his nephew. Family, right? He armed his trained servants. So he had trained servants. Born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Dan is way up north. That tells me that Abraham has a whole lot of people with him when he has 300, what was it, 18? Of those who were trained for fighting purposes. So we see that Abraham could be a man of war when he needed to be. Yet he's a man of peace. He was willing to compromise over the land, but yet when his brother gets in trouble, he goes to his rescue. I suppose there's a spiritual lesson for us also, that we ought to be concerned about our brethren, spiritually speaking. And when one of them has been taken captive by Satan, that we should try to rescue him. Any questions that you might have or observations? If you raise your hand, I can't see you. It means from beyond the river. Beyond the river. No, Hebrews, not Shebrews, huh? All right. Okay.
lot of positions, you had to have some
Exactly. Especially in the Middle East, right? Which we might consider that part of the world as today, probably much like it was back then. So he divided himself against them and in his servants by night. Most likely, these kings that have taken the others are not expecting them to come up there. So they might not have guards out there even. And so what they do is they go at night and they surround them, divide against them, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. One commentator that I was reading after today suggested that here you are in your tents, not expecting to be attacked, and all of a sudden you're being attacked. Can you imagine the commotion trying to get out of the tent and so it may not have been a lot of fighting going on. It's probably, he's saying, a lot of running. In other words, just trying to save your life, being attacked this way. Of course, God is the one that's going to deliver him. And so, as I mentioned up north, this is up at Damascus. And I believe that Damascus, if memory serves me correctly, from Bible geography many, many years ago, that Damascus is the oldest continuous inhabited city in the world. And that's located in Syria, still inhabited today. And he brought back all the goods, and he also brought again his brother Lot and his goods. Now note this, and the women also, and the people. Now the text didn't tell us that the women had been taken, not explicitly, but it tells us that he brought them back. So the Bible teaches by implication then that the women were also taken away. And of course they might have been made slaves and whatever, if they had continued. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter of Kedorlaomer. And the kings that were, now you have to wake up. And the slaughter, the kings that were with him at the valley of Sabbath, which is the king's dale. Now wait a minute, I thought the king fell. King of Sodom and fell. Sodom fell. Okay. This is meaning that he just fell there and was not killed, or this could even be a successor that went out. But I've often thought that it didn't say that he died, it just says that he fell. One person said he climbed up out of that slime pit afterwards. And but anyway, the king of Sodom comes out to meet Abraham, is who he's coming to meet. Not only that, but now we've come across something very interesting, and I'm just going to have to mention it, and then we will have to conclude, because I don't think we have the time much to get into it tonight. We've got about 4 minutes, I think. And that's Melchizedek. Who is Melchizedek? He's king of Salem. What is Salem? Jerusalem. Early inhabitants of Jerusalem were people who were known as Jebus and Salem. Jebus, Salem. The word finally comes together, Jerusalem. Salem means peace, right? Shalom in the Hebrew. And so here's the city of peace then, which has been much here lately, of course, anything but peace. But Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine in order to refresh Abraham and the others. And he was also the priest of the Most High God. So here you have king and priest. Jesus Christ is going to be a high priest after the order of Melchizedek. We might start up next Wednesday night noting some of these things about him. If you will, do some research between now and next Wednesday night, in the book of Hebrews especially, about Melchizedek. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more then, Lord willing, about Melchizedek. There have been all kinds of conjectures as to who he was, but also of something of interest. It talks about Melchizedek being without beginning of days nor end of years. Okay? What does that mean? Well, we'll have to come back next Wednesday night and talk more about that. Jesus Christ is going to be a high priest after his order and not the Aaronic priesthood. And the Hebrews writer is going to make some arguments off of that in Hebrews chapter 7. So you might look at that. We might know more about Melchizedek if the people if the Hebrew brethren had studied. Because he said, I've got many things to tell you about Melchizedek, but you can't hear them now because you're dull of hearing. For when for the time that you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first. I wonder what he would have told us about Melchizedek if the Hebrew brethren had studied like they should have. And so our lack of study of the Word of God may actually influence people in later generations. Just a thought. Well, I think I'll just go ahead and stop there since the light's back on. And I can actually see what I'm saying now. But anyway, so I appreciate your patience tonight. And you had to sit in the dark, hopefully not spiritually. That is, I'm in the dark on that, we sometimes say. But tonight you were in the dark, weren't you? So anyway, so we'll pick up then with about verse number 18, Lord willing, next week.